floods bring more misery to Mississippi and Louisiana. The White House hopes the Senate budgeteers may reconsider their defense spending cuts. Good morning, this is Reed Collins with the CBS World News Roundup. Tomorrow, it may have the first back in the cargo hold. The first snowflake formed in weightless space. It's an experiment sponsored by Japan's biggest newspaper and suggested by a couple of Japanese high school boys. A Japanese scientist claims to have formed the first artificial snowflake back in 1936. The youth's experiment, turned on yesterday and photographed, should determine what kind of flake you get in space. Some guess it would be a sphere, the smallest area theory, or at least symmetrical. It should add some way to the science of crystallography and may reveal more about the manufacture of useful crystals in space, which may have some applications. The little snowflake back in the Challenger has no real application of its own as far as is known, but the very chance to have some role in the space adventure spurred more than 17,000 Japanese who submitted their ideas for the Challenger mission, and the little snowflake experiment won. It's a light day for the Challenger astronauts, weightless, you might say. Judy Muller has their story in Houston.
This is Judy Muller at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. The astronauts aboard the Challenger awoke moments ago to the strains of an Irish ditty, which begins, "I'm a lousy co-pilot, a long way from home."
I treat him to coffee, I keep him in close. I laugh at his corn and his horrible jokes. And once in a while, when his landings are rusty, I come through with, "Yes, sirree, Captain, it's gusty. I'm a lousy co-pilot."
This last full day in space will be spent preparing for what they hope won't be a rusty landing, scheduled for tomorrow at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Mission Control will be debriefing mission specialist Musgrave and Peterson on that 4-hour spacewalk yesterday. During their excursion into the open cargo bay, the two astronauts tested out those new $2 million spacesuits and procedures that could be used in the future to repair spacecraft in orbit. Judy Muller, CBS News, the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Space Shuttle Challenger has been eating breakfast and doing very little talking with Mission Control this morning. It's expected to be a rather anticlimactic day all around. Squished between Thursday's 3.5-hour spacewalk that was marvelous and tomorrow's scheduled re-entry through the atmosphere to the concrete landing strip at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Mission Control's Terry White says there's more concern this morning about another spacecraft that hasn't been performing quite as well as the Challenger. TDRS, the $75 million tracking satellite, is apparently acting up again.
We continue to experience roll dynamics anomalies. The team is evaluating these conditions. No action other than maintaining the spacecraft is anticipated today.
It's a day to deactivate experiments and clean house in anticipation of tomorrow's scheduled landing at 12:47 in the afternoon. A return home that KTRH will cover live. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
CBS News, this is Reed Collins. Astronauts have a fairly easy day on this, their last full day in orbit. They're returning to their familiar landing site, Edwards Air Force Base in California, tomorrow, 5 days, 19 minutes after liftoff Monday.
CBS News, I'm Dallas Townsend. The last full day of their orbital journey aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger. With all going well, they're packing up in preparation for tomorrow's return to Earth at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Vice President Bush talked to the astronauts today by radio and said they're bringing out the best in the United States.
Load has been light today. That gives the crew plenty of time for cleaning up the Challenger.
But it's kind of like taking a vacation in a cabin somewhere for 4 or 5 days. So about the 5th day, when you're ready to move, you realize how much stuff is spread out all over.
The astronauts today talked to Vice President George Bush touring Mission Control. Bush congratulated the crew, but not just for their successful flight.
We wanted you to know that you've driven the Beach Boys off the front pages of the papers down here in Houston and across the country. That's the good news.
The other good news is the winds are light, the conditions just right for landing at Edwards Air Force Base tomorrow. NASA says the touchdown will be 6 minutes late because Challenger is in a slightly different orbit than expected. That landing now slated for 12:53 tomorrow afternoon will be carried live here on KTRH. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
News, I'm Dallas Townsend. The flooding astronauts are now spending their final night aboard the Challenger. No problems are reported, and they're due to return to Earth tomorrow at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Former astronaut Frank Borman, now chairman of Eastern Airlines, today announced that Eastern will lay off 1,600 workers, most of the members of the machinist union, over the next 6 weeks.
The Texans flying the space shuttle tonight are playing music from Willie Nelson. A relaxed day aboard the shuttle is winding down this evening as the astronauts finish cleaning their ship. 150 miles below at Edwards Air Force Base, the winds are light. The conditions just right for tomorrow's scheduled landing. The touchdown, now scheduled for 12:53 tomorrow afternoon, will be carried live here on KTRH. Ed Miller at the Johnson Space Center, KTRH News.
A problem did develop Friday night when one of the 4 computers on board the shuttle failed. It still hasn't been fixed, but Mission Control notes that only 1 computer is needed to operate the spacecraft. As for preparations at the landing site, they're going well, according to David Dick at Edwards Air Base.
The normal preparations are underway. The space shuttle should be touching down at 10:53 a.m. California time. That would be 1:53 Eastern time, and that's about 4 minutes later than originally scheduled. And this is due to some of the activity that occurred during the space flight. The significance of this 6th flight in the space shuttle program is, first of all, I think, assuming all goes well, the successful completion of the maiden voyage of the Challenger, just getting it up there and bringing it back down again, proving that it can do and did do what it's supposed to do, an accomplishment which should not be minimized.
Correspondent David Dick at Edwards Air Force Base in California. More news in a moment.
Braces for more rain and flooding. Hawaii faces more lava from Kilauea, and Challenger gets ready to land. I'm Deborah Potter reporting on the CBS World News Roundup. Heading for home today, preparing to land in the California desert. We have 2 reports. First, Judy Muller at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
When the Challenger astronauts woke up this morning, their first on its hour-long descent towards home. They will leave behind in space that 2.5-ton TDRS satellite, launched from the cargo bay earlier this week. The TDRS is still in the wrong orbit, wobbling like a toy top at the end of its spin. The satellite ground crew is confident that the TDRS can be stabilized and boosted into its proper orbit, but that could take weeks. Meanwhile, the landing of the shuttle is just hours away. Now to David Dick at Edwards Air Force Base in California for details on today's landing.
The weather outlook for today's landing of the Space Shuttle Challenger is good, with scattered clouds and light variable winds. However, if winds should intensify out of the northeast, there could be a change of runways here at Edwards Air Force Base. But if yesterday's weather conditions are any guide, Challenger will end its maiden voyage as planned, with only a slight deviation in touchdown time, 4 minutes later than originally scheduled. The landing now expected to be 1:53 p.m. Eastern Time, 10:53 a.m. California time. For the crew, Mission Commander Paul Whites, Mission Pilot Carol Bobko, and Mission Specialist Dr. Story Musgrave and Donald Peterson, the touchdown here will conclude a 5-day history-making flight, including the deployment of this country's most ambitious communication satellite, however flawed it may turn out to be, and a flawless spacewalk, the first for the United States in nearly 10 years. David Dick, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
Bring the Challenger and her crew down to Earth. KTRH's Wayne Dolcefino is at the Johnson Space Center and has this live report on today's shuttle schedule.
An hour from now, the shuttle's big payload bay doors will be closed, one of the necessary procedures before the Challenger begins its dramatic deorbit burn and drop through the atmosphere to the concrete runway at Edwards Air Force Base in California. The housekeeping chores are all done. Not very much fun, it sounds like.
It's kind of like taking a vacation in a cabin somewhere for 4 or 5 days. About the 5th day when you're ready to move, you realize how much stuff has been out all over.
Commander flights lamented on the cleaning for the return home. The space shuttle is scheduled to land at 12:53 Houston time. KTRH will provide live coverage. We'll also be there at Arlington Air Force Base when the astronauts arrive back in Houston sometime today. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
Mutual News. With the country and western version of the Penn State song Ode to the Lions, the astronauts were awakened early this morning in preparation for this afternoon's return to Earth. The song was played in honor of Challenger Commander Paul Weitz, who graduated from the university. Challenger heads for a landing in the California desert at Edwards Air Force Base. Hugh Crother, a National Weather Service meteorologist, told Mutual News from Kansas City the weather looks fine for this afternoon's landing of the Challenger.
That looks good for today. It'll be fair weather across the area, sunny skies, and in fact, a little bit windy, westerly winds as high as 15 to 30 miles per hour.
Hugh Crother of the National Weather Service said the winds could make the landing a bit tricky for the astronauts.
Load bay doors are ready to close as the Challenger crew prepares for the deorbit burn of Challenger's orbital maneuvering system engines about 3 hours or so from now. The weather looks good, according to shuttle veteran astronaut John Young, who's already flying around Edwards Air Force Base in California.
There are no clouds in the sky all the way to the coast except for the low cloud cover in the Los Angeles basin. And the only factor is no turbulence below all the way from 45,000 feet to the ground that I can feel to mount anything in the T-38, but the only factor is the wind, and it's right down the runway at 12 knots right now.
Roger.
The shuttle crew has been given instructions just in case one of the 4 computers that failed yesterday fails again, or if additional left-side thruster jets fail. None of those problems expected to affect the scheduled 12:53 landing. We'll cover it live. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
Space Shuttle Challenger's first mission, Jay Barbary reports from Cape Canaveral.
Challenger's over the South Pacific with 2 trips around Earth to go before re-entering the atmosphere. The astronauts have closed the cargo bay doors for the re-entry, the last major preparation for their return. In fact, things are going so well. Commander Paul Weitz, a 50-year-old retired Navy pilot, had a comment about the U.S. Naval Base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
Fantastic view of sunny, beautiful Guantanamo Bay today.
That's super.
That's probably before your time.
My father told me about it.
I did not need that.
Challenger is to land at 1:53 p.m. Eastern Time. Jay Barbary, NBC News, Cape Canaveral.
Aboard the Shuttle Challenger, the astronauts have completed the final big and necessary task before firing the rotor rockets to begin the return to Earth. Reporting the cargo bay doors now closed.
Everything is zipped up.
All zipped up, and on the 80th orbit, about an hour and 50 minutes from now, over the Indian Ocean, the rockets will be fired to slow the spacecraft, and at 1:53 p.m. Eastern Time, the Challenger is scheduled to land at Edwards Air Force Base in California. The weather outlook there reported good. CBS News continues in a moment.
About 2.5 hours, the shuttle Challenger is scheduled to land on a concrete runway at Edwards Air Force Base. The process that eventually gets it there has already begun. This morning, the crew successfully closed the huge cargo bay doors, a necessary step before the shuttle starts its fiery descent through the Earth's atmosphere. My colleague David Dick is at the landing site now in the California desert.
Judy, astronaut chief John Young has been up in a T-38 plane over the Mojave Desert here this morning, and he reported no clouds, no turbulence in the area where Challenger will be coming in. The headwind on the designated runway 22 has been clocked at 12 knots, but just a little while ago we were told unofficially winds are 15 knots gusting to 20. So far this increased wind is not considered a problem. Judy?
Conditions look great for landing today. This is Judy Muller, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
CBS News. This is Rob Armstrong. In less than 2 hours, if all goes according to plan, the maiden mission of the Space Shuttle Challenger will come to an end in California's Mojave Desert. The latest in 2 reports, starting with Judy Muller at the Johnson Space Center.
In a little less than an hour from now, the crew aboard the Shuttle Challenger will turn the ship around 180 degrees, so it's flying backward. That will put the 2 rear maneuvering engines into position to brake the vehicle. After the engine burn, the shuttle will be turned around nose first again, and once it's slowed down, it will lose altitude to begin the descent to take them home. All preparations for the landing today at Edwards Air Force Base have gone very smoothly. The crew has been stowing away gear, checking out systems aboard the orbiter, and closing those 60-foot-long doors to the cargo bay. A large crowd of spectators is gathering at the landing site in the California desert. My colleague David Dick is also there with this report.
Here on the Mojave Desert, the wind has been kicking up this morning. Officially, it was clocked at 12 knots a few hours ago, and that was twice as strong as yesterday morning. But now, less than 2 hours before the scheduled landing of Challenger, the weather forecasters here tell us the headwind has increased to 17 knots, and there are gusts in excess of that. But that's surface wind. It's calmer aloft. But what this means in terms of the landing is that the same runway will be used, the hard surface main runway 22, but when Challenger comes in, it will land farther down the runway, which is incidentally a 15,000-foot runway. Conditions for landing continue to be go. David Dick, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
CBS News at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. As the Shuttle Challenger enters its final orbit this hour, the crew will fire the engines that will take it out of orbit and start its descent. Its destination, a runway at Edwards Air Force Base in California, where the astronauts have been told a welcoming committee is waiting.
A lot of big crowd waiting to watch you touch down.
Also waiting is my colleague, David Dick.
The crowd continues to come in on this side of the runway where Challenger will land. About 2,500 chairs have been set up for special invited guests. On the other side of Rogers Dry Lake Bed, tens of thousands of spectators have been predicted. And there's another visitor today, one not entirely welcome, and that is the wind. It's out of the southwest at 17 knots. This is a headwind. It simply means Challenger will land farther down the runway than it would if winds were calmer. Judy?
Thank you, Dick. Sounds like conditions are good. This is Judy Muller, CBS News, Johnson Space Center in Houston.
The reason I ask that is because turnaround final ended up a little low on energy with a speed brake and automatic, and that will be corrected if that change was put in. Obstacle 5, stand by, we'll check.
This is Dial-a-Shuttle. You're listening to Gilda Bronstein, and we are 1 minute 38 seconds away from the ignition burn that will send the Space Shuttle Challenger down into the Earth's atmosphere. We are 29 minutes and 53 seconds away from the entry interface point. That is where the atmosphere really starts to have an effect upon the spacecraft and where the thermal blanket and tiles really begin to do their job. The surface of the craft will heat up to a temperature.
Challenge Houston, we confirm that it is a girdles only high load, and if you're getting low transitions, approach and land out there, low energy, it's probably due to the winds.
It will heat up to a temperature.
I think just tell them to keep an eye on the speed brake, come around the hatch, that's all, so they didn't dump too much energy on them.
Of over 2,000 degrees.
Roger, and John, we have not noticed in our runs with the balloon wind so far any problems on energy. Could you give me a feel for where you're getting the transition to approach and land? What altitude? Yeah, right, 10,000. Okay, thank you.
22 seconds away from ignition burn. That is when the shuttle will start her descent into the atmosphere of the Earth. On our viewing screen, we can see hundreds of thousands of people gathered at Edwards Air Force Base.
Mission Control, Houston, coming up on the time of ignition for the orbit burn. Mark, ignition should be underway now aboard Challenger.
now begun her descent into the Earth's atmosphere. We are approximately 4 days, 23 hours, 25 minutes, 22 seconds into this very exciting mission, very successful mission. We have on our viewing screen a picture of Edwards Air Force Base where we have hundreds of thousands of people that are just as anxious and excited and happy about welcoming the Space Shuttle Challenger home.
Touchdown an hour and 12 minutes from now.
And we have the exact time from Mission Control when the Challenger will set down at the Edwards Air Force Base in California. That is in 1 hour, 11 minutes, 44 seconds from now. We are in the loss of signal phase with the Challenger. We will acquire signal again in approximately 5 minutes, 43 seconds. Total current mission elapsed time 4 days, 23 hours, 26 minutes. Gilda Bronstein with Dial-a-Shuttle. Dial-a-Shuttle is provided as a public service by the National Space Institute with partial support from Science Digest. If you would like to support this program and receive information on NSI and how you can own a piece of Skylab, America's first space station, write us. For a contribution of $3 or more, we'll send you a sample issue of Space World magazine. Send your contribution and name and address to NSI, Suite 203W, 600 Maryland Avenue Southwest, Washington, D.C. 20024. That's NSI, Suite 203W, 600 Maryland Avenue Southwest, Washington, D.C. 20024. I'm Gilda Bronstein, and you're listening to Dial-a-Shuttle, brought to you by the National Space Institute. Total current mission elapsed time, 4 days, 23 hours, 27 minutes. Until acquisition of signal, we have another 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That is when we should be able to hear the communication between the Space Shuttle Challenger and Mission Control.
John, could you give us a little bit more information on where you think you're getting low on energy, where you're encountering the problem? That's right, as you turn on throttle, I'm going to leave the speed brake in auto this time, just like BJ would, and see what happens. Okay, good. We'll be standing by here for a couple more minutes. We're about 4 minutes till we pick them up at York and Vic. Okay?
We have the Mission Control commanders talking to each other, trying to figure out some of the last-minute details before the shuttle actually touches down.
Come in and get that control box. We're going to put it back in there and check voltage. Everything else we done came out good, right? You know that.
Dial-a-Shuttle, and you're listening to communications between the mission controllers as they are working out some of the last-minute details prior to the landing of Challenger.
NASA 946, we're about a minute before acquisition in Australia. We'll be back with you in about 10 minutes. 46, roger.
We are very close to our acquisition of signal phase when we will be in contact with the Shuttle Challenger itself.
Mission Control, Houston. Acquisition of York and Vic coming up in about 40 seconds. We're some 52 minutes away from touchdown at this time. Get confirmation of our deorbit bird here at York and Vic.
I'm Gilda Bronstein, and this is Dial-a-Shuttle. We are about 52 minutes and 3 seconds away from touchdown. A very exciting hour this will be as well. After a very successful mission for the maiden voyage of the Space Shuttle Challenger. Total current mission elapsed time 4 days, 23 hours, 37 minutes. And we should be in acquisition of signal right now. We should be able to hear the communications between the astronauts aboard the Shuttle Challenger and Mission Control. We're here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, bringing you live 24-hour and up-to-the-minute coverage of the voyage of the Space Shuttle Challenger. Just a little while ago, we had a picture of the Edwards Air Force Base in California on our viewing screen. It looked like a very nice day for a landing.
Challenger Houston's with you at York and Vic for 7 minutes. Roger, sir. It was a good burn right down the pipe and smooth all the way. That's great news. I gave everybody a last vote at 30 seconds if they didn't want to go around one more time, and all I got was blank looks. Nobody wanted to do that. Well, I'm sure you would like to have a lot more time in space, but maybe we can get you another flight real soon. I think that's the better way to go. Okay.
We're listening to communications between the Shuttle Challenger and Mission Control. The shuttle will be landing on the runway at Edwards Air Force Base. The reason for this is because of the recent flood conditions that have been out at the base. That is what made the dry bed unsuitable for landing. Otherwise, the dry bed would have been preferred.
For 16 minutes approximately, due to a communications blackout caused by the heat of the air around them, it ionizes the air, and they can't do anything. They can't get any air communications through, so even though they will be passing within range of the Hawaii tracking station, we probably won't hear from them, and we'll next hear from them at the Buckhorn tracking station. About 1 more minute worth of communication. A reminder that the post-landing press conference is scheduled for 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this afternoon, and Dial-a-Shuttle will carry that for you live for its duration. 20 seconds LOS, and recheck configured LOS. Looking forward to seeing F Troop coming over the hill at Buckhorn in about 30 minutes. So are we, babe.
CBS News reporting from Edwards Air Force Base, where in less than 30 minutes, the spacecraft Challenger is scheduled to come home. The landing will be on the main hard surface runway here at Edwards. On an otherwise beautiful day out here, the only negative factor has been the wind, officially clocked at 17 knots this morning, but we're told it'll hold stable there, perhaps diminish some by the time for touchdown. Challenger has many friends.
It's just a tremendous experience, and all the people and everybody here has the same thought. What a wonderful thing that this is for America. And it puts us way above the rest of the world.
Spectators began coming in on the far side of Rogers Dry Lake Bed last night, and here at our vantage point, about 3 miles from the point of touchdown, invited guests have been filling 2,500 chairs. This is David Dick, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
About a minute away from the hopeful acquisition of the crew aboard Space Shuttle Challenger. They have been in a period of a blackout for about 14 minutes now as they entered the Earth's atmosphere, faced the fiery heat of reentry, heat up to 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a beautiful day in Edwards Air Force Base in California, Doug Miller.
And as a matter of fact, Vandenberg, the tracking sensors at Vandenberg have just picked up the signal. The Challenger is coming home. It's re-entered the atmosphere right now and sailing down toward Earth. As a matter of fact, we should be acquiring the signal from the Challenger about 35 5 seconds from now. The crowd at Edwards Air Force Base estimated about 40,000 people. It's now traveling about Mach 12, the space shuttle is, and they're expecting to see it roll down the runway about 12 and a half minutes from now.
The chase planes are up at Edwards Air Force Base. They will be following alongside the Space Shuttle Challenger, as it appears to the folks, 40,000, 50,000 people who have gathered along the dry lake bed that's not very dry at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Once communications are reestablished, at that point, the Space Shuttle Challenger will be 181,000 feet high, as we said, 513 miles downrange from its landing. Buckhorn now has acquisition of signal.
Miles uprange from Edwards.
That's the Buckhorn tracking station we're talking about. The station that will have contact with the space shuttle as it rolls on in, down the white line.
Altitude 168,516 feet.
Now traveling about Mach 10.
We're expecting to hear from the astronauts just any second now.
Challenger Houston's with you through Buckhorn. Configure AOS. Right down, we're here. Okay, you're looking real good. Your energy and ground track are right on. Nav is good.
Okay, at time 23:57:30, we had an alert message, IMU Flight 3, but it did not show up on the system.
Copy.
We also had a mass alarm when I opened the MTS TVC. I sent up to 2, probably just drained the system a little bit.
Okay, copy.
Commander White's discussing an alert signal on an inertial measurement which provides
300
navigation.
nautical miles to the runway.
Well, as we
Challenger
said,
Houston, IMU 3 looks good. Probably just out of transient.
as we said, the inertial measurement unit looks good. The Space Shuttle Challenger on its way home. And we'll be back in about 6 minutes or so to bring you continuous live coverage of Challenger's return home. For Doug Miller, I'm Wayne Dolcefino reporting live from the Johnson Space Center.
Left Florida, but there's a good crowd on hand in California, isn't there?
It's almost as though more people here seem to care and have a personal interest in the space program. You have to hasten to add that the space shuttle is made here in California, and a lot of people who are out here today have a direct connection with the program.
We saw that.
And it'll be coming over the California coastline in about 35 seconds from now. All systems are functioning normally on the Challenger. Mission Control has been very pleased with this new bird. When they finally got it off the ground a couple of months late, it's going well.
Bob, the Challenger will come swooping across the desert. You'll hear twin thunderclaps as the sonic barrier is broken as Challenger comes across the Edwards Air Force Base runway, makes a sweeping turn, and comes back to land on that concrete runway. NASA would have preferred to land on the dry desert lake bed. At least it is normally dry. But this year, because of the heavy rain and snowfall in California, that lake bed looks more like mush than concrete. And so Challenger's landing was moved to the paved runway.
Map out message, disregard.
They're 140 miles out, Bob. And day after day, the flight directors and the astronauts have evaluated this flight in superlatives. A super vehicle, a much better experience than we had any right to expect. Truly impressive how this vehicle is performing. That's what we've been hearing in the air-to-ground communications. The spacewalk, for which there was much extra effort and preparation after those spacesuits failed on a previous flight, that walk went flawlessly. The schedule at a pace that benefited from previous experience allowed all the scientific experiments to be started and completed as planned. A happy group of people as the 6th shuttle insignia is about to go up on the wall of Mission Control, as it traditionally does. We're 107,000 feet up in the air, Bob.
And about 7 minutes and 43 seconds from touchdown at Edwards Air Force Base in California, the chase plane is already airborne. Charles Justice, the pilot, Pete Stanley, the cameraman, that will provide NASA with those close-up pictures that they so desire to check out the final approaches for landing.
Challenger now down to about 1,600 miles an hour. The worst of it is over. Commander Paul White's plan to fly the spacecraft by hand just about all the way in.
Interesting to note, too, Vic, that shortly before their final orbit, he said he asked around, anybody want to go around one more time? He said all he got from his 3 crewmen were blank stares, so they decided to come on in.
A hugely successful flight.
Houston, take care of data to GNC only.
There's not much to do right now on board except just to keep the eyes and ears open.
91,000 feet altitude, 3,000 feet per second.
That's Terry White, mission control.
Miles range.
Counting down the miles, speed, minutes from touchdown.
Everything going well as Challenger heads toward a landing here in the California desert. This huge crowd now beginning to grow silent, waiting to see Challenger as it comes across the mountains and heads toward the landing strip.
Bob, the crew does have the option of turning back to automatic pilot between 12,000 and 5,000 feet as the descent is made. The captain has his choice. There are maneuvers, however, in the atmosphere that he is required to make as part of the test flight of this vehicle for the first time going. And another test on touchdown we've been told about. The brakes have to be checked out. So he's going to press them down hard for a while and then let up a bit and see how much of that 10,000 feet they're supposed to use they actually do use, Bob.
And we're about 5 minutes from landing. Really, excuse me, Vic, go right ahead.
Challenger only gets one shot at this landing. The spacecraft makes a very good orbital flying spacecraft, but not a very good airplane. There aren't even any jet engines on board. So Commander Paul Weitz gets one shot to bring it in like a 190,000-pound glider.
And we're 5 minutes and 27 seconds from landing.
Are we beginning?
And they're on the monitors already. Yes, we are. Chapman and Houston. The NASA monitors are picking up that tiny speck of white and that now familiar picture of that huge white bat-like creature coming back into the Earth's atmosphere.
It's almost a miracle of optics to get the picture from as far away as they're getting it, both from cameras perched on a mountaintop, and they also have that chase plane that you talked about, Bob.
And we're blessed with an incredibly clear blue sky in California this morning. And after all the rain they've had, this is a break.
Say the same thing about Texas, in fact.
Yes, good. But a beautiful blue sky. The only question was the winds earlier today, and John Young has been up in that chase plane all morning. Not in the chase plane, in the special NASA plane.
1,250 feet per second.
John Young actually ran two sets of flights across the runway. First, as you said, Bob, in a T-38 jet trainer to check out the winds earlier. And then within the last half hour, he made another run in an aircraft that is specially modified to handle like the spacecraft. It's called the Shuttle training aircraft, and he reported that everything was go. Everything was go, winds gusting up to 22 knots. But straight down the runway, Challenger will land into the wind. And now the crowd here beginning to point up into the sky. In the brilliant blue Florida sky, California sky, there is a white contrail as Challenger starts to come by overhead, almost directly overhead.
Range 20 nautical miles.
Beautiful sight.
Buffett, we've been waiting for it. Roger,
3 minutes, 50 seconds from landing.
Your energy? Well, everything looks good here, Roy. Couldn't look better.
Couldn't look better.
The astronauts report everything looks good here.
Couldn't look better, they said.
Velocity down less than 1,000 feet per second.
564 miles an hour.
And a round of cheers breaks out among the spectators gathered here at Edwards Air Force Base.
Boy, the nose is pointed down now, Vic. The nose is pointed straight down.
There are the double sonic booms as Challenger breaks the sound barrier over the landing strip and begins to sweep out in that long left-hand turn back toward the runway.
21 miles from that runway, 7 miles high, 537 miles an hour. She's coming in straight down. Pictures from the chase plane look brilliant, look very good.
This is the world's heaviest glider, Bob.
3 minutes.
Heading alignment circle.
And counting to landing.
Right on.
Photo chase.
They're right on.
Charlie Justice is tagged up with the spacecraft. Getting a good picture now from the rear seat camera.
That's Terry White in mission control. And Commander Paul Weitz
feet altitude.
Has the option of flying part of this on automatic controls, but he indicated before he would probably fly it himself.
Most pilots do.
Manual pitch and roll mode.
Challenger has a new navigational aid that the earlier space shuttle Columbia didn't have. It's called a heads-up display, and it projects like a movie screen on the cockpit windshield the attitude, the speed, the heading, the distance to go, and the altitude of the spacecraft. So Commander Weitz
Lake Edwards being the sun below it there.
Can fly the spacecraft down without ever taking his eyes off the air and the landing strip ahead.
11 miles to landing. They're 3 miles high now.
We got the
435 miles an hour.
That's great. Final wind update, 220, right down the runway at 18 knots.
Okay, verify you're still at the close aim point.
We call this the final approach.
And everything is looking good here at Edwards Air Force Base.
A little over a minute now to landing. You can hear the exultation in their voices as they come in, noticing the sailboats out there in the
Still
Pacific.
in manual mode on pitch and yaw.
He's still
Challenger
flying
now.
7 miles to touchdown.
Virtually lined up with the runway, the nose of the spacecraft pointed down, headed toward the landing strip. The last thing that happens just a couple of seconds before touchdown is release of the wheels, and believe it or not, those wheels just kind of drop out. They only come down one time. They're not made to go back up again.
They drop like the spacecraft itself. Doesn't fly like an ordinary airplane because it is not.
No, Bob, the astronauts say it flies like a brick. And the Challenger looks to be coming back in very good shape.
You can't
Last
see those
final
little specks
seconds.
of insulation that came up. Nobody's been worrying about that for quite a while. I can hear the crowds, Vic, and the wind out there is still whipping around. I can hear it on your microphone.
The wind blows straight down the runway as Challenger comes heading into a beautiful landing. People pointing out toward the desert lake bed. Now beginning to flare. Commander White's picking up the nose of the spacecraft. Challenger headed toward a landing.
Here comes the gear.
Wheels down. Nose of the spacecraft up slightly as they head toward the runway. Challenger just moments from touching down. The main wheels are on the ground. A cheer goes up from the tens of thousands of people gathered here at Edwards Air Force Base. After 5 successful days in space, Challenger is back on the ground.
We marked the unofficial
Successfully,
touchdown
safe and
time
sound.
at 5 days, 0 hours, 23 minutes, 42 seconds.
And you heard the official time, 5 days, 23 minutes and 40 seconds. The Challenger now coming to a very slow roll. He does have brakes on board, correct, Vic? He can break it down.
And part of this mission was to exercise those brakes on the new spacecraft to see how they work.
They obviously work fine because it's almost stopped now.
Not even a bounce. Commander Paul White's put it down as smooth
Wheels
as silk.
stop at 32 past the of this minute.
And they got a welcome home from Mission Control. And so, Vic Ratner, there's some sort of a procedure we go through now before the astronauts can get out of the Challenger.
That takes some amount of time because NASA has to check to make sure that none of the fluids the Challenger carries on board are escaping and that the atmosphere around the spacecraft is safe. Then the astronauts will come out, have a quick medical check, be reunited with their families, make a brief public appearance here at Edwards Air Force Base, and be back in Houston before the day is out. Irv?
That's about right. In some 6 hours' time, they're expected to return here to Houston to land at nearby Ellington Air Force Base, where friends and fellow employees of the Johnson Space Center will be waiting to greet them. Their accomplishment was made possible, as Commander Paul White put it from the flight deck the other day, because they were standing on the shoulders of giants. And those are words taken to heart by the people who welcome them home right here. Bob Walker? And I think, Herb, we can talk now about the accomplishments of this first flight of the Challenger, because they were several, weren't they? Well, indeed. We had the launch of the satellite. We had all of the tests of the new vehicle. But also, there was a full program of experimentation. And Space Agency planners developed a timetable for the experiments based on the experience of 5 previous flights. So each and all of them were carried out like clockwork. Some continued work began in earlier flights, such as the test of a pharmaceutical manufacturing device that separates particular fluids more purely and more cheaply than possible in earthly gravity. A second device, also for possible use in medical research, makes tiny latex spheres perfectly shaped. And then there were those 3 small canisters, the so-called getaway specials. One, a group of experiments designed by engineering students at the Air Force Academy. The second, an effort to produce snow crystals in space and find out what shape they would take. This is a project of Japanese high school kids sponsored by the Tokyo newspaper Asahi Shimbun. And the last, some seeds from the Park Seed Company, which wants to find out how best to package vegetable seeds for future space station residents to grow their own food. Here on Earth, the Park Company handed out copies of its seed catalog, and the earthbound tomatoes look very tempting. Vic, how are they going now with taking care of the post-landing functions?
Challenger has come to a stop, and the 25 vehicles in the convoy that are used to make sure everything is safe around Challenger have started to move into position. It's a long convoy, and that will take some time before the astronauts can get out. We mustn't forget also there's the first flight of a new spacecraft. This mission also proved that the second space shuttle works, and works very well. Very clean, the engineers call it. There were few problems once the spacecraft got off the ground. 2.5 months of delay before launch, but few problems once they got off the ground. And of course, out in space, Challenger orbited the largest and most complex communications satellite ever. TDRS had a problem getting it into the right orbit, but NASA now figures it will be able to eventually nudge it into the right place so that that communication spacecraft can be used to improve communications between Challenger and the ground on future missions.
And to avoid the long periods in which the spacecraft is not between or not over any particular station, so that we all sit here wondering what's going on with it during crucial times of the mission. Bob Walker?
Yeah, in about 6 days from now, the Challenger gets on a piggyback ride this time, doesn't have to fly on its own. It'll go back to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And in a couple of months from now, it's STS-7, the second flight of the Challenger, the 7th shuttle flight. And in that flight, there's going to be 5 people on board, including the first American woman who will orbit, Sally Ride, 32 years old. And it'll also feature some spectacular shuttle maneuvers, so we have that to look forward to. As for Columbia, for all you nostalgia people, it was a couple of years ago that Columbia made its first flight. It's going to fly again sometime this fall, and a man by the name of John Young is going to go right back up and pilot the Columbia once again. Speaking of old men, the Challenger crew calls themselves the Geritol Bunch. They're the oldest crew ever to fly in space. They average 48.5 months, years in age. And altogether, they've had a combined flying experience of 111 years. So the Geritol Bunch is very proud of the Challenger as our mission control specialist. The Challenger is home. It has been a hugely successful first flight of this all-important space shuttle. For Vic Ratner at the prime landing site at Edwards Air Force Base in California and Irv Chapman at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, I'm Bob Walker. This has been a live special report from ABC News.
Challenger is home about 12 minutes after the touchdown of Challenger, 9,000 feet down the runway, number 22 at Edwards Air Force Base in California. It was a beautiful sight. As Challenger came in, it looked absolutely beautiful, Doug.
Indeed, and the shuttle itself does not look charred as the earlier shuttle missions have. Columbia, of course, an old spacecraft, traveled in space 5 times already, looking a little bit dirty, as the NASA people say. But this, an absolutely clean craft. The Challenger looking really good sitting on the runway at this time. And at this time, ground crews are checking out around the Challenger to make sure there are no residual toxic gases left around. They're going to set up a sort of a wind machine to blow away all those gases. And in just a couple of minutes, they're going to roll up a big white room to allow the crew to exit. After that, they'll be debriefed briefly, that is. They're at Edwards Air Force Base. Then it'll be on to Houston. They're expected to arrive around 7 o'clock tonight, roughly 7 o'clock tonight, for the homecoming to Houston. And, of course, KTRH will be there to cover that as well. Live at the Johnson Space Center for Wayne Dolcefino, this is Doug Miller.
CBS News, this is Jackie Judd. The Space Shuttle Challenger is home after traveling more than 2 million miles through space. David Dick reports from the landing site at Edwards Air Force Base in California.
The astronauts have left their spacecraft now. They appeared to be in fine shape as they walked around the airship that had served them so well for the past 5 days.
And another orbiter joins the fleet of active spacecraft in the STS system.
Next stop for the crew will be the medical debriefing, and after that the astronauts will make their first public appearance. The landing here at Edwards Air Force Base was smooth despite a 17-knot headwind. Huge crowds turned out to welcome home the Challenger following its successful maiden voyage. As many as 100,000 spectators were on hand. David Dick, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
The second flight of Challenger is scheduled for early June. More news in a minute.
Crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger now undergoing medical checkout following their 2.4 million mile journey through space, an 80-orbit flight that included the deployment of the world's largest communication satellite and the first spacewalk in 9 years. The Challenger glided to a perfect landing on runway 22 in a 17-knot headwind at Edwards Air Force Base 4 minutes before 1 o'clock. Reporters are now being briefed right now on the landing operation. Tomorrow we'll get word from California on the status of the Challenger. It looked just fine, brand new, as it glided toward touchdown. The day isn't over yet for the shuttle crew. After ceremonies in California, they'll hop aboard T-38 jets for the trip back to Houston, with ceremonies at Ellington Air Force Base scheduled tentatively around 7 o'clock. For those of you who'd like to go, Ellington Air Force Base is located along Highway 45 South. If you're coming from Houston, you'll see the Ellington Air Force Base exit. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.